All right, welcome back to Why Well Fails. I'm Steve Brown, your host, and today we've got Lloyd on the line again. Lloyd, how are you today?
I'm all the good, Steve. Thank you. And yourself?
Oh, excellent, excellent. Looking forward to this because I sometimes I have to catch myself when, the title of today's program is The Problem with Only Looking Backward. And if we're always dwelling on the past, there's a lot of things that we miss that if impacts our energy, impacts the way that we're approaching the world. And this is just like with what you're dealing with. You guys have a process, and let's talk about it. You have a patented process called the Pathfinder process. And this is the result of many years of experience, and we covered that in the last episode. But oftentimes you have these conversations with folks that you're working with their wells. And let's talk about this, the objection that we have all this data and we pretty much are dialed in with what we believe is the right way to go about this.
But, in my book, Refined by Failure, Breaking Rules and Getting Burned, one of the things that going through the process of looking back is if you don't learn or you believe that you've learned everything you need to, you don't have the ability to change. And one of the things that, speaking as a recovering know-it-all, it's amazing when I went into recovery, the amount of learning that happened and actually having the ability to say, I'm sorry, was one of the other things that have come about from that. And so the problem with thinking that we learned everything from looking backwards, right? That we've experienced it all. It goes to a lot of times it's groupthink. A lot of times looking backward is, hey, this is what we've always done. This is why we've always done it. And we're getting by on the results that we have. And one of the challenges that I had doing that when we looked backwards at the data in completing oil and gas wells, we never could say, all right, our laboratory data said this was going to be the answer and the results in the field matched. It doesn't happen. Well, it does now, but it hasn't in the past because so many times the methodology that we utilized in the laboratory was not set to the actual conditions downhole. Most testing was to test a hypothesis that would be this chemistry will do this, this, and this. And that goes back to a lot of times taking lessons learned from the past and applying it to a new problem. So you're comparing an apple to an orange. And when you do that in a laboratory environment, you end up damaging your reputation. And so the reputation of companies that sell completion fluids is we're a bunch of snake oil salesmen. And guess what? Yeah, that's probably well-deserved. It's well-deserved because it's arrogant thinking that one thing, one chemistry, one solution is going to fit all the dynamics that we've learned that create that are disrupted during the process of fracking. It's not one thing, and there's not one way to mobilize hydrocarbon in geology. There's always consequences to the decisions that we make.
There's, over time in an organization, it's kind of like the science is settled monkey business. It's never settled, right? And it's just, so over time in an organization, this thing can happen. You call it groupthink, but it's like, yeah, it's just this chemistry. is the silver bullet we'll put in here and run with that.
Well, and it's also because there's a low level of trust. The safe thing to do is to do what everybody else is doing, because you're going to get your reputation damaged. And so we're not asking, when people choose to work with us, we're not asking them just to trust us that this is the right. We want them to take the time to teach, educate, and reveal what we've learned. We've discovered a new physical law for the way something happens downhole during the disruption caused by fracking. Guess what? You can't patent the law that you learned, but you can use it. And it ties into the natural law of equilibrium we all understand, but this is a secondary law that we discovered, and it's listed in our patent based on what happens during the disruption of a frac. And knowing what you're working with, the geology, and taking all of the knowns, and then developing a protocol to evaluate methods to put dynamic equilibrium on the geology. And that's a real big thing to grasp, is that we're putting a force that stops the kaolitic process during fracking. And the answer, or the question I really think, is, why do we need to stop that? Because if we don't stop that, we start the dissolution of carbonate, predominantly carbonates with high amounts of clays and pyrite. And when those dissolute, guess what we get? We get CO2 and H2S. And that starts another part of the process. Now we have other materials, metals, and clays that start falling off of this geology, and it ends up plugging everything off. And it plugs the ability for hydrocarbon to be mobile. So what we've learned is taking what we learned in the past. So again, if you only look backwards and say that we fixed it, we solved it, we have to go now say, all right, we understand the consequences of disruption, of disrupting equilibrium. And now we're measuring the benefits of putting dynamic equilibrium on the geology and letting it produce. And, we've talked about before, one of the things that we're having to learn, because it's so different, is many times when we're talking to new customers, we're like, hey, do you have problems with H2S or CO2? And they're like, no, we don't really have any problems. Well, guess what? They're making it, but it doesn't inhibit them from selling their product. A lot of times what happens is when the H2S gets to a place that it does, they have to come in and use secondary treatments to clean up the H2S so they can sell their product into a pipeline. Same thing can be said for CO2. But one thing that we have to understand, our operating partner has a cost, no matter if it's a problem or not. So making less of something that increases the lease operating expense over the life of the well, our process mitigates it as much as you possibly can for the life of the well, while enhancing the production of oil.
I love that. If you're having to do adjustments, then even though you may not have declared it a problem, it is. If whatever is causing you not to be able to sell your well downstream is a problem.
That's a problem. But the thing is most operators don't have a problem selling it, but they have a hidden cost. And the thing that we can reveal is we can reduce that hidden cost. We're probably never going to eliminate it, because there's naturally occurring CO2 that's not being produced by the geology or by the disruption of the geology. It's already been baked and it's already been created, but we can stop the process of creating more. And that is reducing the cost of that well over time. While it's really the cool thing about it is it's a compounding impact. It reduces the cost over time while it increases the revenue over time because we're going to make more oil and we're going to make more natural gas. And so, does it sound too good to be true? From what we know in the past, and if we apply what our knowledge base is from looking backwards, yeah, it is.
So you have a patented process here, and you didn't just make it up. You've done case studies. Let's talk about this more in depth.
Well, the case studies that we've done, we were fortunate enough to have a large 10 well package. 5 wells were done utilizing our process. 5 wells were using the industry low cost, one size fits all process. And in that case, over a 2.5 year period, the refined process generated an average per well in excess of $4 million over 2.5 years. And that's taking in any incremental cost, which in this case, each one of those wells, the 5 wells that utilized our process, had an additional input cost, a capital cost of about $75,000 a well. Who would not invest $75,000 to get a return of in excess of $4 million?
Mm.
Would you do that in 2.5 years?
Pick me, please.
Yeah.
Serious.
And in that study, we also have looked at the impact of the amount of CO2, H2S that's both in the produced water and in the gas streams. And it's in excess of 90% lower on CO2, and it's even higher than that on H2S. Now, these 10 wells were not in a high, what we call pyrite environment. There wasn't a lot of opportunity for there to be large quantities, but it was still that order of magnitude less between the two processes. So it was, it's something we look forward to sharing. And the neat thing is the data from it is all from an operating partner that is allowing us to share their data on this study and bring it to the marketplace. It's the first time we've had the ability to do that without, and we will not break the confidentiality agreements we have in our master service agreements, but they felt like it was such an important benefit to the market that they've allowed us to bring that, and we provide them with a preferred partnership model on their pricing to give them the most cost-effective, cost-beneficial program there is. So
the way that I'm hearing that is this is such a competitive advantage that there was a risk of them participating in this case study more publicly.
Mm-hmm.
So that communicates to me that, my goodness, that's a great relationship. But if it's that big a deal, tell me about the process getting them to participate. Obviously, I'm not clear on everything that goes into obtaining a patented process, but then that must be more complicated with a partner.
Well, they weren't a partner in the development of this, but they were a partner in the fact that we've had a long-term relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And they, quite frankly, we were at a precipice where they were going to start spending less because everybody else was. And there was some laboratory science that was done by a renowned testing laboratory that actually said the process that we were doing actually damaged the geology, and they'd be better off not spending money at all. And so we were at a life or death moment in that relationship when this study came about, and we were able to convince them to do this 5 wells versus 5 well test. And that's how they gave us the trust to continue to do the testing. And we knew we were right. I mean, we just had extraordinary confidence because we had finally seen some offset operators production using the cheap industry method. We knew we were going to win the test. We didn't know that it would be as significant that it is. I mean, 40% uplift is almost unheard.
Per well,
which equated about $4 million in 2.5 years. And these were 2 different target zones. Sprayberry and Wolfcamp A, Wolfcamp B were the 3 separate target zones that the 5 wells were spread apart among.
So the name is a Pathfinder process.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also the equilibria test. That's a part of this as well?
That's a part of it. Equilibria is part of the Pathfinder process. It's a way to take geology and apply a testing protocol that mimics in the laboratory the disruption that happens during fracking downhole. And the challenge that we have in the laboratory is getting to the high pressures that we have downhole. Most of the time we're fracking anywhere between 5,000 PSI to, depending on which target you're going to, it could be 10 or 11,000 PSI. And you shut that in and you have a holding pressure in, 5,000-6,000 PSI. Well, in the laboratory, we're only able to run this equilibria at 1,000. So we're not identical to what's happening in the formation, but we are creating a very similar degradation process to be predictive. And what we see in the laboratory is the actual results we see in the well. And the cool thing is the water is always what tells us. It's like your blood. If you're eating poorly, your blood's going to show it. If you're eating well, it's going to show it. The same thing is if we do the right thing and we create the appropriate dynamic equilibrium on the geology, then the water coming back is our first proof that we did the right thing.
So this patent, it's in the U.S., obviously. Where else?
It's in Europe right now. It's filed in the U.S. And I believe we're in 29 other countries plus the European Union.
Pretty exciting.
It's extraordinarily exciting.
So tell me about your operating partners. How do they think, and where does this enter their evaluation process?
Help me understand a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Well, when I think about this thing being patented around the world, obviously there are going to be some progressive-minded folks that are going to, light bulbs are going to go off immediately. They're looking for a competitive advantage. I mean, this is not just a per well improvement. This is like how you would investigate a bigger return on on leases wherever they may be, and it seems like it would change their mindset about how they would begin to approach things in a with bigger expectations. I would assume there would be all sorts of advantages looking at a lease and going, oh my gosh, we're reducing this hidden tax or this hidden penalty.
That's a great way. Yeah, it is a tax.
Mhm.
It's a toll tax. That's how the companies pay the companies that transport the oil and gas. They charge them a toll tax based on how much CO2 or H2S are in that is in that gas stream, or whether the hydrocarbon, the oil, is sweet or sour. There's a tax. You can go look at the tax that you pay for West Texas Intermediate sweet or Louisiana sweet versus West Texas sour, and it's a big number. There's taxes all along the way in the companies that touch this material, and so that's a tax. The other side is there's a massive amount of additional income to be made because the production is higher, and the wells are going to have less mechanical problems caused by scale and corrosion. And so you win in three different fronts: two really in controlling the cost, the lease operating cost, and one in generating much higher rates of hydrocarbon.
That's awesome. You know, many companies, they'll pay for corporations to come in and help improve their culture. Why? Because if the folks that are in that working in that organization are more in sync, they have clarity, they understand what they're doing and why, a big improvement. Corporations that don't, they're paying for it when they don't even realize it, right? And
right.
So,
well, and great point, Steve. You know, one thing that we found is when the production company and the completion part of the company have either are one and the same, or they have a very integrated approach, those companies find our value much quicker than if they're a really highly structured, highly separated, one doesn't know what the other's doing. That's when you see challenges in understanding both sides of the equation, because the completion side is usually a capital side. They have an amount of capital and they create an operating well. And from that point, they're done. And they go hand it over to the production group, and the production group either gets a well that has no problems because it was completed right, or it's going to be a problem child for the rest of its life. Our job in between is to help both of those groups be the most capital efficient and effective in creating the asset, and being the most cost effective in the producing of that asset.
So my mind, when you were saying that, oh man, you know, this is not just about picking a chemical. It's about running a business in a more effective way. But I'm losing my point there. So these folks that there's more siloed, what are some of the objections that you're getting, and how are you getting past those?
You know, it's all about just being patient, Steve. It's really about, this is not trying to sell somebody. This is all about education, proof of, number one, you have to prove that your theory is correct, that your patent's around. But number two is it's so much more fun to take your time, not be in a hurry, and help all of the stakeholders in a company understand the why behind it. Because ultimately, it's their company, and we're there to be somebody that creates high intrinsic value. And so, the way you overcome objections is you teach, you don't tell. This is helping others, and guess what happens when you do that? We end up learning more. You get somebody that a lot of times the really young engineers that don't know that there's a question that might be deemed, oh, that's a stupid question. Man, you're like, why did I not think of that? Because they have fresh eyes, right? They have the ability to see something we become calloused by. Again, the problem with looking back is, or looking at your hands over time and looking at them and you got calluses all over them, the same things happen to our eyes and our minds as we become calloused to what we're used to. And in many ways, we're blind or we're desensitized.
You've mentioned the why, helping them see the why. Tell me more about that.
Well, we're in a world that, and we understand this in oil and gas. There's a lot of hydrocarbon that's still left in the ground when wells become non-operational, non-economic, and the why is we need to be just as resource. Respecting the amount of resources that we can get from one well instead of continuing to produce more and more. Let's be as effective and as efficient with our assets as we possibly can. That's the why. And that creates value for my company and all the stakeholders, from our financial partners to our employees and our customers. All of those stakeholders benefit from us learning ways to be as efficient and effective with the dollars that are invested. That's the why. And the why is you have to understand what you're doing before it's the scientific method's the why. You can't change multiple things and understand which one really made the difference.
Right.
So our process is the thing. If you have not had a process that is predictable, that predicts in the laboratory what's going to happen in the field, then you don't have a process, you have a wish.
All right, Lloyd. Great conversation. I'm learning a lot of things, and it's fascinating to me, but there's just the principles are the same in different domains. Why wouldn't it be downhole, right?
Absolutely.
So cool. All right. Good job today, Lloyd.
Thank you.
Another great episode of Why Wells Fail. All right.